concern is that we have yet to kind of be in a denominational conversation about our funding crisis. You know, I mean, we're kind of all trying to be really positive and drill down even harder on our spiritual practice, but I think our context for how we're funding our churches is part of the problem. And until we have a kind of more universal intentionality around really cultivating the value systems associated with helping people transition into greater ownership, and until we help leaders learn how to partner with the community as opposed to being in protector roles, it's going to be hard to move the needle in terms of our denomination. So it's almost like there's aspects of what's happening in terms of the entropy or the decline or what's kind of dying is that there's a lot of tired ministries out there.
Yeah.
A lot of stressed ministries out there.
If I could add that it has to start with the leadership, because that's the one thing I've learned over the 6 years is that when I'm feeling like I'm not enough or it's not enough or how are we ever going to pay those bills, that is really adding to the problem. And it doesn't mean you stick your head in the sand and pretend that all's well when that's the double vision part of it. We see the dire straits or whatever, and at the same time we have to buy into and really live this. When we live it as leaders, as soon as the first board that we got to, when we got together and the first board all went into agreement on ownership and automatic giving, and you could feel the shift. It started there. It's been blossoming, but it's no quick fix, and it really takes a lot of internal introspection or watchfulness as to any time I'm showing up with less than, and it mirrors. I mean, we know how that works, and so there's a lot to it, to hold the reins, to hold the vision, and to trust, and to have faith, and to walk the walk. It takes some guts, I'll tell you, but it works, and I think that's the key.
And so I have seen, churches just use up all of their resources, and then the minister leaves and there's no assets left. So there's a partnership that is necessary as leaders as well as congregants.
Right. So this brings up a really good point, Denise, and I haven't spoken to this, I don't think. And that is, right now in these times, there's what I call a reckoning that has to occur for churches in order to kind of move forward, especially with the new funding model. For instance, the new funding model, or the spiritual cooperative, this idea of people doing what they can do, won't work if people live in the perception that the minister's making too much money, or the church has expenses beyond its means. So for most organizations, most established organizations that are in decline, there has to be some kind of reckoning, a reconciliation between the reality of what is the income of the church and the historical context of where people are in the current funding of the positions. So for instance, it's highly likely that most paid clergy are making more money than the churches can afford by virtue of the decline in support, not necessarily decline in their worth or what they provide. It's harder for churches that are in tremendous decline to really legitimize paying a minister more than what is feasible or practical in the context of the viability of the organization. So these are complexities in the whole funding kind of dynamic, and that is, if there's a church that has a financial kind of imbalance, either associated with someone being paid more than is customary or practical, or there being some kind of dimension of the church that is out of integrity. All of those things have to be kind of reckoned with before everybody can say, okay, the expenses of the ministry are legitimate, and then therefore, as owners, we should own all of it. And so that's an important step that I haven't really talked about, because a lot of church decline, there's also a lot of baggage associated with trust issues and money issues, and so it becomes even harder to really implement some of these mission-centric imperatives that have to do with retooling how we fund the organization, until there is a kind of real reality check with respect to the money that's there and the salaries that are paid and the expenses that are a part of what are the obligations of the church. So that sometimes is an issue that has to be sorted out.
If you could speak more to that reconciliation process, and if it's germane, use your example of being there in Spokane and what you did to do that reconciliation.
Well, so for us, our reconciliation process was they were in the red, and so it was a matter of whenever you're not in the black and you're in the red, you're not taking in as much money. The first thing you try to do is you try to eliminate your expenses or reduce your expenses. And so in the course of our time, we have been able to reduce our expenses till sufficiently each year through attrition and through the shifts in our operations to where now we have, just this first year, we've been in the black. And so for us, the reckoning has been to have a budget that reflects the bare necessities of our operational effort. There's nothing extra in terms of fluff or benefits, and so everybody sees that there's no place where we're spending money that we shouldn't. No one has an issue with anybody's salary. Everybody sees the budget and knows that it's accurate, and that's what we have to fund. So, but for my other clients, that was not the case. So, for instance, when there's a significant deficit, and then there's also a large group, or at least a significant group, that is withholding funds because of past issues with the leadership and their calls for transparency and for more accountability, have created a kind of layer of complexity and drama that I have to kind of manage in order for us to kind of get at a reckoning that works for all parties involved. Because part of what happens is that a minister who's often perceived to be paid too much has had a history of trying to be paid what they're worth, and then finally gets that, and then the bottom falls out from underneath them in terms of the economy, and then now they're now people are trying to grab at what's the low-hanging fruit for reducing expenses, and that's usually the salaries. So for you, for instance, David, reconciliation has to do with making sure that everybody values and appreciates what all the entire effort is. So long as you know that the minister's role is not over extravagant with respect to what your income is and what the dynamics of ministry dictate because of these times and your circumstances. There are other reckonings that have to do with how people are in relationship with each other. In other words, their well-being and their integrity and their maturity. So that's another kind of reckoning, having a community recognize that their victim behavior no longer serves the greater good. That's also reckoning that has to take place. And that's a challenge, because a lot of what a minister-centric ministry kind of enables is victim behavior.